As I prepared this talk, it was part of a month of a 6-week period which has been full of horror. I started thinking about my talk in Canada when I was there visiting family. The Orlando massacre was on the news. 50 young people shot in a gay nightclub, killed, and another 50 injured. Families distraught, communities grieving. Shortly afterwards, the police shot yet more unarmed black men in various cities. And then a new and even more or equally barbarous event when police officers who were themselves guarding Black Lives Matter protesters were in turn gunned down by a sniper. And of course, the stories go on all around the world. There was a crazy man who drove a truck into a crowd of people looking at fireworks, deliberately aiming at children and families. There are many other disasters. Faced with these events, you might think to yourself, what is happening? Is this unimaginable horror, this parade of unimaginable horrors, endless? Humans don't act as though they think so. After every event, people come together. They come together to grieve. They come together to remember and celebrate the dead. They come together to try to change. Now, the form of that change and the effectiveness of that attempt is what we're talking about today. In the United States, to an outsider, to a Canadian, to an Australian, there seems to be a point of change easily accessible. Let's try not to sell assault rifles to crazy people who are on a terrorist watch list, who already have been found to be violent. Maybe that's the point of change, gun control laws. Now, in the US, after every massacre, and there are many massacres, people mobilize towards gun control. Here are some examples in the left-hand pictures on the screen. But if I say to you, what do you think? Are we close to a change in the gun control laws in the US? Are we almost there where we could see sensible measures introduced? I think you're going to say to me, no. And that's not the only difficult problem that our society faces. The previous speaker raised one. We are destroying the earth. We are harvesting its resources at a rate that we can't sustain. People are taking action all over the world. They're taking strange actions, right? You can paint yourself green. You can bicycle naked through the city to raise awareness about fossil fuels. You could climb the Sydney Opera House. You could be in a march. All of these change attempts have been happening now for years, and with special urgency in the last 5 and 10 years. But if I say to you, are we close? Are we close to stopping habitat destruction? Are we close to stopping the descent towards climate change? Are we close? I think you would say to me, no, we're not close. And things that seem even simpler. There are so many health issues: binge drinking, cigarette smoking, drug use among teenagers and adults. These are preventable problems. The obesity epidemic is another. We've seen a change in our culture of increasing risk, mortality, morbidity. People have been campaigning about this for years. And if I say to you, are we close? Are we about to change? Is this working? Are we building up to a solution? I think you would say to me, no. So there are a range of areas where we know how, as a society, to solve our problems. And there are another range of areas where we seem to be stuffing up. That's what we're talking about in my talk. And I'm going to tell you 3 things that I don't think you know, that I would like everyone to know about how to change intractable and difficult problems. I'm calling it getting a grip on problems. You know, we love our acronyms, academics, don't we? We're going to think about groups, the inclusiveness of groups, and prioritizing change. We're going to think about these 3 things today. All right, if I say to you, how would this message save the world, this message today? I think you would say to me, well, it would be something like this. I learned something as a psychologist, and I tell it to you as a TED speaker. You hear me as a TED audience, and then you tell your colleagues and your workers, you tell other students, you tell academics, you tell NGOs. A message is spread through our social networks, or maybe we short-circuit it. You know, maybe we put it out in the mass media. That's how information gets out, and that information changes the world. But what about the end of the world? So ably introduced by our last speaker. What do I mean? I mean this data, this fabulous data from the Washington Post, published in 2014. So the title of the graph is, "The severity of recent natural disasters is evidence of," and the results show a survey of American respondents. The green bar, the left-hand bar from your perspective, is people who are answering that the bushfires, the floods, the cyclones, the typhoons, these are potential warning signs of global climate change. Now the brown bar on the right side from your perspective is people saying that these fires, these floods, these disasters are evidence of the biblical end times. Some of you might be thinking, what end times? The biblical end times, when God is going to destroy the world, lift up the saved, and cast out the damned. Now, what you can see in this graph is that in some faith communities, a majority of people believe that the fires and floods are evidence that the biblical end times are coming. They're upon us. Well, that's going to affect your motivation to deal with climate change, isn't it? It's going to affect whether you think it's worthwhile or even desirable to fight against it. That's one point to draw, but here's another. I've just told you that some people think that bushfires in Australia and floods are evidence of the end of the world coming. Are you convinced? No matter how many times I repeat that message, are you going to be convinced? And that's my point, right? When we pass information to each other, we can only do that if we have trust and openness in our relationship. What is the limit of education? What is the limit of the strategy of information transmission? The boundaries of groups. No matter how many times people in that faith community tell me their belief, I'm not convinced if I'm not in their faith community. And we can have 50 years of climate science that repeat a message that we believe to be true, urgent, and dangerous. But if it's running into a group boundary, education will not take us through that wall. That's the first point I want you to know. Okay. If we then know we do need to focus on groups, we have groups here, problematic groups, and I'm an authority or an NGO, or maybe I'm just a passionate person like our fabulous speakers before us, what do I do next? I'll tell you first what the mistake is that most people do. They realize there's a problem group. Let's say we're dealing with terrorists. Whew, they're a group and they're scary, right? Now, they are a small group, but they speak, they claim, on behalf of a bigger group. Let's say we talk about these Muslim terrorists, so-called. We'll problematize that. These terrorists say they're talking about opposition to the bombings and the invasions in Syria and Iraq. Opposition to political strategies in which Australia is implicated. And in turn, these political opponents speak on behalf of an even larger group, the entire Muslim community, all people in the Middle East. Now that's how they pitch themselves, okay? Now once I'm in the authority, what do? A very common mistake is to draw a line between yourself and the entire community. Oh, we have a problem with Muslims. We have a problem with Muslim violence. Now, what is the problem with that? Well, first, you've created what we just discussed. You've now put a group boundary between yourself and the target audience. That will mean there is no trust and openness. That's one problem. There's another. You've given the terrorists what they illegitimately claimed. You're acting as though the terrorists are the leaders of the entire Muslim community, but they're not. You've made invisible the real leaders, the real moderate and legitimate leaders within that group. So you're going to be less persuasive because of the way that you've approached these groups. What do? You need to draw a boundary between the terrorists and the political opponents. There's lots of social, rhetorical, political strategies that you could employ. We could talk for an hour about that. But you could start with the rhetoric, right? Let's say something like, there are hundreds of thousands of Australians who are profoundly opposed to the bombings in Syria and Iraq, and who are sick with disgust when they hear that 85 people were killed last week, as is the case, in an accidental bombing from a Western strike force with children's body parts scattered all over the road, when people hear that, they are disgusted, they are horrified, and they want it to stop. These people are together with us. We are speaking to each other about problems that we see, and we are finding solutions together. That is our rhetorical approach that provides us with the basis for true persuasion. Inclusiveness allows you to proceed towards trust and openness, whereas those group boundaries do not. Now, it's normally easy for a left-wing audience to see how a right-wing politician that stigmatizes all Muslims because of terrorists is doing the wrong thing. But let's try something trickier. Let's try some left-wing issues. Let's say that you're worried about the environment, and let's say you're worried about fossil fuel use. Now, everyone who drives a car uses fossil fuels, and even if you don't drive a car, we all use fossil fuels indirectly. It's the basis for our society. Fossil fuel use implicates us all. So we're aware of that as environmentalists. How common is it to draw a boundary between ourselves and the entire Australian community? Australia, the most wasteful society in the world. Australia, the highest energy users per capita in the world, among them. Well, of course it may be true, but is it persuasive? Does it help Australians to listen to your message? No. When they hear that message, the trust and the openness is reduced. They are less likely to attend to you. What we need to do is acknowledge the reality. There are hundreds of thousands of Australians driving cars and using fossil fuels that are worried about climate change. They don't know the answer now, but if they could flick a switch today and turn their cars from fossil fuel use to something else, they would flip that switch. They know there's a problem. They are sharing with you the search for a solution. That's the rhetorical space to begin from. And here's one more, very relevant. At a time when many of us are really alarmed about Donald Trump, he was scary. Pauline Hanson, scary. Sonia Kruger, scary, right? Now, how easy is it for us to say, yeah, these bigots, and everyone that's worried about all those issues, immigration, Sharia laws, terrorism, everyone that's even part of the passive community that tolerates and supports these views, how easy is it for us to draw a line between the enlightened and the Australian community, the most racist country in the world, or Australia, a place of entrenched chronic and ongoing racism? You may feel that to be true, but is it persuasive? Does that sound like the best way to open a comment with an Australian? No. We need to divide fear and hate. Don't put them in together. They're very different. We need to divide the worriers from the bigoted. We need to divide the people who are advocating banning all Muslims from Australia from the ones that are scared of Muslims. The second group is bigger than the first. And we need to say there are lots of people that are worried. They are worried about the safety of their children. They are worried about these rumors that they hear of homophobia, of sexism, of violence being taught in schools. They're worried. But you know what they don't want? They don't want to see the police stopping you on the street asking you, what is your faith? And they don't want to see institutionalized discrimination where Muslim school children fear that they're going to be interned in camps. They don't want that. So what we share is the awareness of the problem, and together we're working on a solution. Those bigoted people have a solution, but a lot of these worriers will not embrace that bigotry if they see an alternative which they can believe in, which addresses their concerns. All right. So we define our group inclusively. We include our target audience. The problem group, we define them narrowly, very narrowly. They're on the other side of the wall. Everyone else is together with us, working on a common solution. One last point we need to realize: we cannot focus on the problem in the present alone. We have to prioritize change. Even these problems that seem like they've been going on for years and they'll never change, they had a start and they have an end. Fossil fuel use, 150 years ago there were no cars. In 150 years, does anyone here think we'll still be driving fossil fuel cars? No. So that is already happening. The future is coming. We just need to steer towards it, right? These issues with Islamophobia are recent in Australia, 15 years old. We've had Muslims since 700. In another 15 years, we hope this time of fear will have passed. Let's get there quickly. So let's steer towards these positive changes. Now, what does it look like when you do that? Well, here's what I don't want you to do. So here's some examples from the environment space. Yes, it looks like they're saying we should be more environmental, but let's take a closer look. What does the one on the left say? European Week for Waste Reduction? 51 weeks of the year of unlimited waste? Isn't that what that says? Stop trashing the climate? What do we see? A mountain of rubbish? Is that what that says? And here's another one. Of course, it's an anti-gun poster, but what does it show? Lots of guns. What is a common way of framing gun control? There's lots of guns, there's lots of gun massacres, we should have less. So as a social psychologist, I can ask, because it's an empirical question, if you tell people a behavior is common and it shouldn't be done, does that motivate them to change? No. Let's see some studies, right? I'm going to go through them quickly. Here's an environmental one. This condition in red highlights that when you tell people environmental behavior is rare and should be done more often, not only does it not increase their intentions, it significantly decreases them. Whoops. Here's another one with healthy eating. What if you tell people, you know, everyone's eating really unhealthily, but we shouldn't do that? Does that increase their intentions? No. In that condition, not only do intentions to eat healthily not go up, they significantly drop. That wasn't what you were trying to do, right? Here's another one. Now here's a key study, one of the studies from my lab. This one highlights that if I think about how some people in our society are doing the right thing and some are doing the wrong thing, and I already have a strong, passionate desire to do the right thing, then when I hear that message, or when I'm reminded of that conflict, I'm energized. Okay, my intentions go up. Now, is that the target audience of any intervention? People who already have strong, favorable attitudes? No. So what happens among those people that don't have favorable attitudes? Are they energized? You guys know what I'm going to say. They are not. Their intentions go down. If you have mild aversion to the environment, you know, no one's truly negative, but it's just, I wish you would stop talking about it, it makes me uncomfortable. Or even mild positive attitudes. Then when you hear this message about how some people do the right thing, some people do the wrong thing, you're like, woo, drop it. I'm in that camp, I'm in the bottom one, right? That's me. Is it possible that activists design campaigns that motivate ourselves and demotivate our targets? That governments, that NGOs routinely put out ads that energize themselves and not only fail to work on the target audience, they actually undermine the desired behavior? Not only is it possible, it is happening. It is happening in every area of social marketing, of social campaigning, of social media. It is a common problem and a common tactic. I hope that you are convinced that we need to think about groups, to think about inclusiveness, to prioritize the positive change, not the problem in the present. What would it look like if we did that? Well, let's take gun control. Is it helpful for me to put up an ad saying no guns? I don't think so, but you know what might be good? This might be good. Makes you feel a bit weird if you're a crazed anti-gun person, which of course many Canadians are, many Australians also, right? To turn to gun owners and work with them. But you know what? Gun owners for responsible ownership, those people might actually be persuasive to other gun owners, unlike you, right? Now maybe there's an issue where you feel like there's no minority within the group that can work with you. What if you're trying to sway Pauline Hanson's One Nation voters to be less hostile to Muslim immigration? Maybe there's no minority within that, right? Well, what could you do? I'm calling it chain of trust. You try to give the message to someone that they might trust. So in the case of gun owners, anti-gun advocates cannot say something useful, but maybe doctors can. It looks something like this. Maybe a gun owner would see a headline like that, and maybe they'd read it, they wouldn't turn off. And maybe if they read it, they might think about it differently than if you or I said it. Of course, there's a third approach that you could do. You could think, yes, I am in a contest with another group. I'm going to try and attack and defeat their leadership. I'm going to try and grind their mobilization, their organization into the dust. Now, that is a strategy that might work, or it might just escalate their commitment. And despite this, I think it's the most popular strategy when people start coming to terms with the group communication situation. That habit of attack of your enemies, that is the go-to, I think. So just to repeat what I'm saying, among those 3 gun control messages, I think 2 are more effective with the target audience, and I think the third is the most popular, maybe the most effective with the activists themselves. Now, I hope that you can see the applicability of this in your everyday lives, whatever message you're communicating, whether it's about the acceptability of stem cell work, or the need to change the environment, or the need to mobilize people around health concerns. We need to think beyond educating individuals to groups. We need to get a grip on the problem. Thank you.